He said it in 4 words. 4 words that changed how thousands of investors think about wealth after 50. You only get rich once. Charlie Munger spoke those words not as warning, but as liberation. And for anyone past 60 listening to this right now, those 4 words might be the most important financial truth you'll hear all year. This isn't investment advice, and I'm not a financial advisor. But what follows is wisdom worth considering. The kind that comes from watching one of history's sharpest minds navigate 99 years of markets, mistakes, and the quiet art of staying wealthy. Most people spend their lives trying to get rich. Munger spent his life trying to stay rich. There's a difference so profound that most investors never see it until it's too late. By the time you're 65, the margin for error is gone. Not reduced, gone. This isn't pessimism, it's mathematics wearing the face of time. You cannot recover from a 50% loss the way you could at 35. You don't have 3 decades for the market to forgive your mistakes. You have what you have, plus perhaps 10 or 15 good years to steward it, and then you need it to work while you can't. Munger understood this in his bones. He made his serious money once, in a relatively short window in his 40s and 50s, primarily through a single brilliant partnership and a handful of concentrated bets that proved correct. After that, his entire philosophy shifted, not from ambition to fear, from accumulation to protection, from getting rich to staying rich, from addition to subtraction. Watch what he did after he became wealthy, because that's where the real wisdom lives. He stopped taking big risks. He stopped chasing new opportunities. He stopped trying to prove he was the smartest person in the room. He put most of his wealth into a single vehicle, Berkshire Hathaway, and then he essentially stopped touching it. For 50 years, he sat there, reading, thinking, waiting, saying no to almost everything. This sounds boring. It was boring. That was the point. Here's what most people miss. Munger didn't say you only get rich once, because getting rich twice is impossible. People do it. Some people get rich 5 times. But Munger was making a different observation, one rooted in something deeper than opportunity. He was talking about the psychology of wealth and how it changes you and how that change should change your behavior forever. The first time you become wealthy, you still remember being poor. You still have the hunger. You still have the fear. You still have the discipline that got you there. But the second you lose that wealth and try to rebuild it, something inside you has broken. The magic is gone. You're now someone who had money and lost it, and that identity poisons every decision you make going forward. You either become reckless, trying to get it back quickly, or paralyzed, trying to avoid another loss. Either way, you're no longer operating from a position of clarity. Munger saw this pattern repeat across decades. Smart men who made fortunes lost them chasing more and never recovered their equilibrium. Not because they couldn't make money again, but because they couldn't make clear decisions again. The psychological scar tissue was too thick. So he built his entire later life around one principle. Don't lose it. Not don't lose money. Don't lose the clarity that made wealth possible in the first place. Let's pause here, because this is where it gets personal for anyone over 50. You've spent 40 years building something. Maybe it's $2 million. Maybe it's $500,000. Maybe it's $4 million. The exact number doesn't matter nearly as much as you think. What matters is that you built it through discipline, patience, time, and sacrifice. You deferred gratification. You saved when others spent. You stayed employed when it wasn't fun. You made boring, sensible choices while the world celebrated gamblers. And now you're being told by every advertisement and newsletter and financial television show that you need to make that money grow faster, that you're missing opportunities, that inflation is eating your lunch, that your friends are getting better returns, that you should be doing something. Munger would tell you to sit down. He would tell you that the game has changed, and you need to change with it. The game is no longer, how do I build wealth? The game is, how do I not destroy what I've built? These are not the same game. They don't have the same rules. They don't reward the same behaviors. In his later years, Munger gave an interview where he talked about his portfolio. The interviewer seemed surprised at how simple it was, how concentrated, how boring. Munger smiled that dry smile of his and said something like, "Why would I need anything else?" He wasn't being smug. He was being precise. He had enough. He had structured his life so that enough actually meant enough. He had no debt. He had no expensive tastes that required feeding. He had no ego that required expensive validation. He lived in the same house for decades. He drove ordinary cars. He read books from the library. His wealth sat there, compounding slowly, throwing off more than he could spend, requiring nothing from him except that he not interfere with it. This is the part where people misunderstand Munger completely. They think he was advocating for some kind of miserly, joyless existence. They think he was saying, get rich and then stop living. But look at his actual life. He had deep friendships. He traveled. He collected rare books. He gave millions to causes he believed in. He worked into his 90s not because he had to, but because he found it intellectually stimulating. He lived exactly as he wanted, with complete freedom, because his wealth was structured to require nothing from him. Freedom isn't having more. Freedom is needing less. By the time you're 60, you should be moving toward simplicity, not complexity, toward clarity, not cleverness, toward protection, not performance, toward boring, not brilliant. Survival beats brilliance. Munger watched the 2008 financial crisis from a position of complete calm, not because he knew it was coming, not because he had hedged perfectly, but because his entire financial structure was built to survive chaos. He held stocks in companies so strong they would survive anything. He had no debt. He needed no liquidity. He could simply sit there and wait while others panicked and sold at the bottom. This is what "you only get rich once" really means in practice. It means that once you have enough, your only job is to not be stupid. It means that the risk that matters isn't missing out. The risk that matters is losing what you have. It means that after a certain age, every decision should be filtered through one question. What's the worst-case scenario, and can I survive it? Consider this carefully. The worst financial mistakes made by people over 60 almost always involve the same pattern. They had enough. They got bored. They got greedy. They got envious of someone else's returns. They got sold something complicated that promised something better. They abandoned the simple approach that had worked for decades in favor of something clever. And then they lost money they couldn't afford to lose at an age where they couldn't recover. Munger spent his entire later life saying no. No to hedge funds, no to private equity, no to complicated derivatives, no to market timing, no to hot stocks, no to everything except the simplest, most obvious, most boring approach imaginable. He said no so much that people thought he was out of touch, They thought he didn't understand modern finance. They thought he was too old to get it. He understood perfectly. He understood that modern finance is largely a mechanism for transferring wealth from clients to financial professionals through complexity and fees. He understood that the more complicated something is, the more ways there are to lose money you don't even know you're losing. He understood that simplicity is a form of protection. There's a story about Munger late in his life, probably in his 80s. A young investor asked him about cryptocurrency. Munger didn't hesitate. He said something close to, "I avoid it. It's rat poison." People laughed. They thought he was a dinosaur. They thought he didn't understand the technology. But Munger wasn't making a technological argument. He was making a behavioral argument. He was saying, "I'm 90 years old. I'm already rich. I don't understand this. Therefore, I don't need it. The risk-reward doesn't make sense for who I am and where I am in life." That's wisdom. Young people should take risks. Young people should explore. Young people should try to get rich. But old people, people with something to lose, people without time to recover, should do the opposite. They should eliminate risk. They should simplify. They should protect. You only get rich once, so don't die trying to get rich twice. Here's the truth no one talks about. After 65, your relationship with money should be moving toward gratitude, not anxiety, toward stewardship, not optimization, toward enough, not more. Munger achieved something most people never achieve. He became genuinely content, not complacent, not lacking in curiosity or engagement, but content with what he had. He stopped comparing himself to others. He stopped measuring himself by net worth. He stopped trying to prove anything. And paradoxically, that contentment is what allowed his wealth to compound undisturbed for 50 years. The math of wealth is simple. If you can compound at a reasonable rate, without interruption, for a long enough period, you end up with remarkable results. But almost nobody achieves this because almost nobody can leave their money alone long enough. They tinker, they trade, they chase, they panic, they interfere. Munger didn't interfere. He made a few good decisions early, put structures in place to protect those decisions, and then he just lived his life. The wealth took care of itself. This is what retirement should look like, but almost never does. Most retirees are anxious about money. They check their accounts constantly. They worry about sequence of returns risk. They stress about withdrawal rates. They lie awake at night wondering if they have enough. They feel guilty spending anything. They feel envious of others who have more. But what if you structured things differently? What if you simplified so radically that you actually understood your entire financial situation? What if you eliminated all debt so you knew exactly what you needed each month? What if you built a portfolio so boring and durable that you could ignore it for years? What if you right-sized your life so that enough actually felt like enough? That was Munger's approach, and it gave him something most wealthy people never achieve: peace. Pay attention to this moment, because this is the difference between a good retirement and a peaceful retirement. A good retirement has sufficient money. A peaceful retirement has sufficient money plus sufficient wisdom to know when to stop optimizing and start living. Munger stopped optimizing decades before he died. He declared victory. He shifted his life from accumulation mode to appreciation mode. He spent his time on friendships, reading, thinking, and contributing to conversations he found meaningful. His wealth was just there in the background, requiring nothing. That should be the goal, Not more wealth, not better returns, not beating the market, but reaching a point where your relationship with money becomes so simple and secure that you can forget about it and focus on everything else. Think about what Munger gave up by adopting this philosophy. He gave up the chance to be the richest man in the world. He could have left Berkshire, started his own fund, taken big swings, maybe multiplied his wealth 5 times over. He had the intelligence, he had the connections, he had the reputation. He chose not to. He chose instead to be rich enough, with complete peace of mind, surrounded by people he respected, doing work he found interesting, with zero financial stress until he died at 99. That's not settling. That's winning. And for anyone listening to this who's past 60, that should be the model. Not Warren Buffett, who's still optimizing at 94. Not the hedge fund manager still swinging for the fences at 70. But Munger, who figured out decades ago that he had already won and then structured his entire life to protect that victory. There's something almost spiritual about this approach. It requires letting go of ego. It requires accepting that you're not going to be the richest person in your social circle and being okay with that. It requires gratitude for what you have instead of yearning for what you don't. It requires wisdom to know when the game is over and grace to walk away while you're ahead. Most people can't do this. They keep playing until they lose. They stay at the table until the house wins. They mistake activity for progress and complexity for sophistication. They die with more money than they needed and less peace than they deserved. Munger did the opposite. He simplified until he could breathe. He protected until he could sleep. He accepted enough until he could appreciate everything. Let me show you something about the psychology of this. When Munger was asked late in life what his biggest financial mistake was, he didn't talk about missed opportunities. He didn't talk about stocks he didn't buy. He talked about positions he held too long, bets he didn't exit soon enough, situations where his own stubbornness cost him money he'd already made. His regrets weren't about what he missed. They were about what he risked after he'd already won. That's the perspective of someone who understands that you only get rich once. Your biggest financial risk right now isn't missing out on the next big thing. It's losing what you've already built, chasing the next big thing. It's taking on risk you don't need to take. It's being talked into complexity you don't understand. It's letting someone else's definition of success make you dissatisfied with your own. The financial services industry makes money when you do things. Trade, rebalance, adjust, optimize. They need you to believe that your current situation is insufficient, that there's always a better approach, that standing still is falling behind. Munger would tell you that's nonsense. Standing still is exactly what you should be doing. You're not trying to win anymore. You're trying not to lose. There's a deeper pattern here that goes beyond just money. Munger lived his entire later life according to a principle he called inversion. Instead of asking, "How do I succeed?" he asked, "How do I avoid failure?" Instead of, "How do I make money?" he asked, "How do I not lose money?" Instead of, "What should I do?" he asked, "What should I avoid?" This is the mindset shift that changes everything after 60. You succeed by not failing. You stay wealthy by avoiding mistakes. You have a good retirement by eliminating the things that would make it bad. Avoid debt, avoid drama, avoid dumb risks. Keep your life simple enough that you can understand it. Keep your expenses low enough that you don't stress. Keep your portfolio boring enough that you can ignore it. That's the entire strategy. It's not complicated. It's not exciting. It's not going to make anyone rich. But if you're already rich enough, it's the only strategy that makes sense. Munger died wealthy, respected, surrounded by people who loved him, having lived exactly as he wanted for decades. He didn't die with the most money. He died with the most peace. And at the end, peace is what matters. You can't take the money with you. You can't spend it when you're gone. What you can do is structure your life so that your remaining years are spent in calm appreciation rather than anxious accumulation. You can declare victory. You can step off the treadmill. You can be grateful for what 40 years of discipline built, instead of regretful about what you don't have. You only get rich once. Charlie Munger knew this. He lived it. And he spent his final decades proving that the richest life isn't the one with the most money, but the one with the most clarity about when enough is enough. Maybe that's the question worth sitting with tonight. Not, do I have enough money? But, do I have enough wisdom to recognize that I have enough money? Because if you do, the game is over. You won. Everything else is just deciding how to spend your victory.